Welcome to the Born Wild podcast. This space is for birth workers, parents, and families. Anyone drawn to a more honest, intuitive way of living, birthing, and growing. Here we have real conversations, learn through reflection and community, and make room to explore without judgment. Because at the end of the day, we are all born wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Henderson, and today I have with me Natasha. Will you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. My name is Natasha Nazarali, and I am a German new medicine educator. Or for those of you that might know it as something different, it's also called Germanische Heilkunde in German, which just means Germanic healing knowledge. So this is a biological framework that uses and looks at biology through the paradigm of the psyche, brain, organ connection. So it even takes psychosomatics one step further into what is the real primal nature of our biology and how do the conflicts that we experience manifest themselves as symptoms in the body. And this was a biological framework discovered by a man named Dr. Hammer, and I had the amazing privilege of being raised off of this knowledge. So how
Oh,
I got
wow.
into this work is actually kind of through a family legacy. My mom studied this biological framework over 20 years ago and
Wow.
taught it to me throughout my childhood. And now she is a grandmother of 5 and
Wow.
I teach it today. And I also, teach a course called The Biological Woman with Dr. Melissa Sell. Maybe some of you are familiar with her work. And that really explores how we can use this paradigm to understand our female health and female biology better. So that is definitely your expertise as well. And we can dive a little deeper into it in this podcast too.
I feel like you have such a leg up growing up with it because it just is part of your upbringing. And I don't know how far back it goes because it feels like such a new thing to me because it's new in my awareness, last
Mhm.
couple years. But to hear like how far back it goes for you, even though it's, becoming more quote unquote popular, now it doesn't mean it's a new way of living and
Yeah, that's a great observation. So Dr. Hammer discovered Germanische Heilkunde, or as most people in the West know it as German New Medicine, in the 1980s. And what actually happened was his son was tragically murdered. And in the process of losing his son, he developed testicular cancer. And at that time, he was working in oncology, he was a practicing medical doctor, and he also had a lot of financial means because he had invented something called the Hammer scalpel, and it's a surgical tool that is still used today. So, with that sort of role that he was already playing, he knew that his testicular cancer was not random, that it must have occurred in correlation with, the tragic loss that he experienced with this trauma of the death of his child. So, with this sort of hypothesis, he set out to be able to prove through evidence the correlation between what happens to us psychologically and then cancer in the body. And through that discovery, he used CT scans and case studies with his own clients in his own practice to codify an entire biological framework. So we actually use a scientific chart in this framework, just like in other science, you have, scientific chart. We actually have the scientific chart of German New Medicine, which is so
wow.
wonderful. And German New Medicine is made up of 5 fundamental biological laws, and those are the laws of nature. So as he set out to discover this correlation between the psyche and symptoms in the body, he discovered these 5 fundamental laws that really everything in nature abides by. So to put this work in the real general whole simplistic terms, this is the work of how we are one and connected to nature, and we're really not separate from it at all. And that's the really beautiful part. And I think one of the beautiful parts about my story that your listeners might relate to is I don't have a medical background or a degree. And I think we limit ourselves sometimes because we think, oh, I can't know about my biology. I can't be an expert in this field because I don't have the education for it, or I didn't get that certification. But really, my story is that biology is who we are, and it's accessible to everyone. And what I love about this wisdom is that we've made it accessible to everyone and anyone who would like to learn.
Mhm. And you are the expert in yourself. That's something that we talk with our families a lot about, like letting nature lead and that they are the expert in their body and their experiences.
Absolutely. You are the doctor. You are the shaman. Only you can heal yourself. And, something that's very dear to my heart is also the work of Bert Hellinger with family constellations. And I use
Mhm.
family systems therapy a lot in my practice. And what we say is mama knows best, right? The mother is the ultimate healer because your mom knows your birth story. She knows what you've gone through. She knows the
Mm.
symptoms that you've experienced, and she can really be the ultimate healer for us. And in family systems therapy, we say our relationship with our mother is our relationship with life. Because when we come onto this earth, we must cry for the attention of our mother so she will come heal us, nourish us, nurture us. And
Mm.
without her love, we don't survive. And isn't that just the ultimate truth?
Yeah. Well, some of the things I'd love to touch on is one, if people are like, I still don't understand what this is, how can people use it in their lives? I'd love some examples of when you were a child, how your mother applied this to your life, or maybe how you apply it to your children's lives. And then also something specific to maybe pregnancy, birth, postpartum. So I
Yeah.
feel like that would be a good direction to go to. But yeah, for somebody who's like, I still don't understand what this is, can you
Beautiful.
explain it?
Let's start with the five biological laws. So,
Mhm.
this framework of biology in our paradigm is made up of five fundamental biological laws. And what are biological laws? What is this terminology we use? So, for example, a biological law would be that every being, every human being comes from a mother. Would that be biological law?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We have daytime and we have nighttime. Is that a natural law?
Yes.
Beautiful. Let's say we have male and we have female. Is that a biological law?
Yes. Things we can all agree on, you
Yes.
know?
Yes. So these are the fundamental laws of nature through which
Mhm.
we are bound to and which we are living in harmony with. And I will break down now what the five biological laws of this paradigm is. So the first biological law, Dr. Hammer called the ironclad rule of cancer. And what that first biological law really is that every symptom in the body is a result of a conflict shock. So I went through a sudden, acute, dramatic, unexpected event in my life, and therefore my body created an adaptation to help me overcome it. And these can be very significant or these can be very minute. So, for example, a conflict shock could be the loss of a loved one or the loss of a child, like Dr. Hammer experienced. And that's very significant. It's a very significant conflict. But a conflict could also be someone cut me off in traffic and I had to slam on the brakes. Even something as minute as that can already create a biological adaptation. So the first law
Mhm.
is really simple. It's one that we can kind of all intuitively, collectively agree on, right? That a conflict that we experience could create a physical manifestation in our body. And that really is just the first fundamental law. Now, our second biological law we call the law of two phases. And this is the law that really gets into our circadian rhythm, what I talked about a little bit earlier. So in our circadian rhythm, we have a daytime circadian rhythm and a nighttime circadian rhythm. Or as we like to say, we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system, right? We go into the nighttime, we rest, we regenerate, we restore, and then we go into the daytime and we live and we take action and we go about our day. So
Mhm.
when we look at the law of two phases, we look at every symptom in the body, every adaptation that I run is going to follow that law of two phases. And the terminology we use in this paradigm is conflict activity and then the healing phase. So, what this means is when I experience a sudden, dramatic, unexpected event, my nervous system shifts, right? I go into the sympathetic nervous system, my body goes into fight or flight. And we forget sometimes that even though we're living in the modern day world, we're still primal beings. So when we experience a conflict and our nervous system changes, it might not be the lion in the wild anymore, but it could be, gosh, the boss at work that just immediately triggers us and we go into our survival mode. So this is
Mhm.
what we call conflict activity. And when I experience that conflict, immediately my psyche, my brain, and my organ work in synchronicity to say, oh my gosh, Natasha is experiencing a conflict. Let's alter our biochemistry, shift her, and create an adaptation that's going to best help her overcome it. So we have conflict activity when we're running in fight or flight. And then we have the healing phase when the conflict is over and everything is replenished and restored, and we go into that deep vagatonic phase. This is why often, like, we don't get sick when we're running in fight or flight mode, but as soon
Mhm.
as we relax, as soon as the conflict is over, oh, now I'm sick. Now I have the cold. Now I
I
have
was
the
gonna say, how
fever.
many times do people say that, like, "Oh, as soon as, everything kinda calmed down, it gave my body permission to get sick," or
Yes.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
when you look at the law of two phases, we actually have a diagram. And what the most beautiful example is of this is birth, right?
I
So
was gonna ask you, like, if that was where birth
yeah.
fit in, but yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely. So, right? So, my water breaks, or I'm going into labor, and what's happening? Oh my God, I'm going into the sympathetic nervous system. Everything's pushing, it's juicy. And then, as the baby is coming out of the canal, that's in the epicrisis. In the healing phase, we have the epicrisis, which is the most acute, dramatic, intense moment of the symptom, right? That's the fever, that's the vomiting, that's the birthing experience, right? The baby is coming out of the
You're giving
canal and
me
it's the
chills.
final push. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
were just out of birth last night, so it's all fresh in my body too.
Yeah. Isn't it beautiful? And then once the baby comes out of the canal, I hold the baby in my arms. And now I enter that final healing
Mm.
phase, which we call the PCLB phase as well, which is really just the real deep rest, restore, and restoration where everything is regenerating before I can return back to harmony again. And what's so
Mhm.
beautiful is the same thing that brought us to the world, the birthing experience, that two-phase program is also happening in the same biological experience that created us. So even an orgasm follows that, right? I'm in this moment of love with my lover, in this moment of passion, this life force that turns spirit into matter, this moment of conception, the divine spark of life. And I go into conflict activity. I go into the sympathetic nervous system. And at the peak of my orgasm, this moment that creates life, I have an epicrisis, right? And then I go into rest and restore. And what do? We lie down and we want to hug and cuddle and sleep. So even the way in which we are come into this world mimics the way in which we are created. Like I like to think of that second biological law as sacred geometry, right? As the
Mhm.
flow of life that we all move into. So it's very beautiful. So that's the second law. And then the third biological law is also following our embryology, is all about the ontogenetic system. So the third biological law follows the different organs and tissues of the body and how they are formed in utero. So it starts all the way from the old brain, which are responsible for our most primal functions, like breathing, procreation, eating the food morsel like nourishment. And then it goes into every layer of tissue, all the way up to the most advanced area of our tissues, which would be responsible for communication, like our sexuality, right? So, what this third biological law really tells me is that every organ in the body corresponds to a different tissue area. And that tissue area lies in a very specific area of our brain. So it's kind
Mm.
of why, if maybe some of the listeners have heard about German new medicine before, they might have seen these colors, this like yellow, orange, red. And what that is how we codify it in the scientific chart is we look at every symptom as, okay, I'm experiencing a symptom here. Now, what organ is adapting with that symptom? And what brain area does that organ correspond to? And that helps me get really accurate about it. And for those of you listening, that might seem like a lot because it's kind of what makes learning this wisdom quite academic and quite biological. Because, people listen to me and they love this sort of concept of psychobiology. And then they're like, wait, do I need to know that, the skin is the epidermis and lies in the cerebral cortex? And it's like, and it's ectodermal tissue. And I'm like, yes, you do need to know that, but you're going to slowly learn it and reiterate
Mhm.
it over time. So, also, if you're new to this, give yourself so much grace because our biology, as you know, in the birthing world, it's incredibly complex.
And this is like learning a new language,
hmm
because I understand pieces of it, but it really is like learning a new language, which luckily your mother spoke the language when you were young.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you grew up hearing all the terminology.
Yes. And what was so wonderful about it is that with this codification, Dr. Hammer was able to discover these laws and create this framework through analyzing CT scans. So, what happened was when he first had this initial hypothesis of, could my cancer be correlated to the tragic loss of my son? He thought, if I'm seeing organ adaptation at the tissue level, maybe there is a way I could also see this at the level of the brain. So, he
Mm.
started with his own testicular cancer, and what he noticed is when he used a no contrast CT scan of his brain, at the organ level, he had adaptation of testicular cancer. But then what he noticed is in the CT scan, at the brain area, in the specific relay that controlled the testicles, was this little ring like formation. It looked almost like a target at that
Mhm.
specific relay. So it was almost like the brain was a map also showing where he had the adaptation. And then he went to every single patient with testicular cancer and he scanned their brains and he noticed, wow, they also, at the relay that controls the testicles, have this ring like formation. He later called that the Hammer foci. And then he moved on to the next cancer. He moved on to breast cancer and he did CT scans of all his patients with ductal breast cancer. And he found, wow, at the relay of the brain that controlled the milk ducts, is the ring like formation. And through the use of CT scans is how he could create that codification. And isn't that
Mm.
like so beautiful to think about? Like, okay, not only am I seeing a manifestation in my physiology, but I also see a manifestation at the brain level. So, with the third biological law of the ontogenetic system, that's how we're also learning how to analyze the CT scans. Okay, so this tissue corresponds to this specific brain area. And when I'm looking at, a patient, I'm looking at biologically what they're experiencing, and then I'm scanning their brains and I'm able to also identify their symptoms at the brain level. So it is so fascinating when you get into this work and you're able to work with some of the amazing doctors and practitioners that still read the brain scans today because they can
Mhm.
give you your entire medical history. They can say, oh, you have this and this and that. It's almost like they're psychic. They cannot even see you. And sometimes we've done this before where they don't even look at the patient and they say, oh, I'm seeing your brain. And I'm noticing you have this and this and this and this. So it's kind of like your brain is a map for who you
Mhm.
are and and what programs you're running biologically. So that's our third biological law. And then our
And
fourth,
that's the piece that makes this law and not theory is that it
yes.
is it is true for everyone who has these symptoms.
Yes, that's very correct. So he found 100% of the time when he's
Wow.
seeing a symptom going on at the organ level, he's also able to see that manifestation at the brain level in the CT scan. And what he did at that time was he also presented his work at the University of Tübingen, where it was peer verified and deemed to be correct. But of course, that was really going against the establishment at that time. So it wasn't revered. And he actually really thought that it was going to be embraced by the medical community because unlike the holistic world, he didn't necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He wanted to acknowledge that medical intervention and the education and the knowledge that we have within the medical system is very useful. And he wanted this to work in harmony with it, not against it. Of course, when you know this work, a lot of the practices that we use would no longer be relevant because you're understanding your biology through natural law, but that there
Mhm.
are times, especially because, we live in a society where we can be extremely conflict active, where we can go through something that's immense. And
Mhm.
therefore, we would need assistance and we would need support. And so when he realized that this wasn't going to be embraced by the medical community, he thought, you know what? It's every person's birthright to know this information. So I'm just going to use my voice and share it with as many people as I can. And one of his visions was actually, how do I share this with mothers? Because mothers
Mhm.
are the ones who will raise the next generation. So he knew if I could just get one person in every family to know this, that is how I could incite change.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is what happened in your family.
Yeah, exactly. Which is one of the reasons why it's so wonderful to teach. And like, I get to teach other mothers. And I like to say that we become and we teach the knowledge of what we once needed at a time
Mhm.
in our life. And, for me, like growing up on this wisdom, it was wonderful, but I also didn't really have anybody in my community that I could turn to that was also growing up this way. I would have loved
Mm.
to have other families or other children that were raised with this awareness. And now I get to watch so many of the people, of the mothers, of the families in our communities share this with their children. And it's just like one of the most incredible honors. It's like, oh, I would have loved to have had that. And now I get to witness that in my
It's a great
community today.
idea.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah,
sweet. Mhm.
yeah.
Well, what's number 4 and 5?
Yes. So the fourth biological law is our law of microbes, that fungi, microbes, and bacteria are there to support us. And they also play a significant role in the healing journey. And that one relates to the third biological law of the ontogenetic system, because it tells me that in certain tissues and in certain organs of the body, certain specific bacteria, microbes and fungi will be present in that organ. So it also lets me know, okay, if I'm looking at the old primal brain, I know I'm going to be having tuberculosis bacteria present. So it's
Mhm.
that specific. But also for those of you listening, you might have heard a little bit about terrain theory, which is the idea that, our biology is like a living ecosystem and we don't have to necessarily be afraid of uh, bacteria or viruses. I like to get a little bit more accurate with viruses and call them protein nucleic acid compounds because that's actually what they are. We don't need to call them something scary like a virus. So we're looking at every microbe, every fungi as meaningful and purposeful. So think about it like if there was a fire and the firefighters came to put out the fire, we wouldn't say, oh, the firefighters must have therefore caused the fire. No, no, no,
Mm.
no. We would say downstream, the firefighters are there to help and facilitate and assist us. Actually, one of the mothers I work with, when her child is, having a sinus program or a stuffed up nose, she says, "Oh, mom, my little firefighters, my little helpers are all up in my sinuses to heal me and to help bring me back into harmony." Like, isn't that such a beautiful way to look at it? And
Mhm.
me, I'm really into how we can most live in harmony with nature, and I love to look at just like how we have 3.5 pounds of fungi, microbes, and bacteria, and how even the fungi that we have with our body is communicating with like the fungi and the ecosystem of the natural world that is existing all around us. I just listened to a beautiful study done on how many microbes we exchange when we kiss each other, and how actually couples who kiss for longer than 9 seconds on a regular basis have a healthier immune system. So they have a healthier terrain, they have a healthier microbiome because they're exchanging this. And isn't it beautiful to think like, wow, even something as simple as kissing has a biological function. We have an inherent biological motivation of why we look at our lover and we want to connect with them in this like moment of passion. It's going even further than just like the love that we're feeling for each other, but even like our little fungi and microbes are communicating and interacting with one another. Like, it's magnificent when you think about
That's
the
so
human
cute.
body from that perspective. No?
That's funny. I'll have to tell my husband because he's always saying, like, "Let's do a 5-second Frencher," but I'll have to tell him it needs to be 9 seconds or
9.
longer.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as possible. My mom used to always say, "Kiss your dog," and we see this, right? When you look at a newborn baby, what do they do? What do toddlers do? They put everything in their mouths because they have this really innate primal instinct to already develop this biological ecosystems, to put everything in their mouths as much as we can, right? And it's just such a beautiful thing to witness.
Yeah. We were
Yeah.
just reading my son's baby book, and I can't remember what age it was, but it was talking about his favorite foods, and it was like the cat and dog food, rocks, anything off the bottoms of shoes, lotion, like all the things that weren't food that he loved to
Yeah.
chew and suck.
Yeah. So, and even like our symbiotic relationships with nature, even the
Mhm.
bug bites we get are putting extra microbes into our system. Like I
Mhm.
work with a lovely practitioner who works with the bees and bee venom therapy and how powerful that is. So like
Yeah.
even if you're stung by a bee, it's not an accident. It's not anything to be fearful of or harmful of. It's actually upgrading my terrain and working with this beautiful symbiotic relationship that we have with the living world around us. So that's the fourth biological law. And then the
And,
fifth
like, reframing the
yeah.
potential discomfort because a
Mhm.
lot of, like, these healing symptoms you're mentioning, like, we could see them as uncomfortable and not
Yes.
wanted, but to reframe it as something that is good for you.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, right? Because the more microbes we have, the more juicy our healing phases are and the more uncomfortable the symptoms can be, right? That's one of the reasons
Mhm.
why antibiotics are so efficient, right? And then what do you do when you take an antibiotic? What does the doctor tell you to do? Take a probiotic, right? Like, oh, make sure you replace. Isn't that so funky? Like so counterintuitive. Oh, you killed all that good bacteria, and so then therefore now we need to replenish it again, even though we killed it because the symptom was there. So when we look at it from this paradigm, we look at it as meaningful, and it is true. Like I'm calling you here from Australia, and when we go into a foreign environment, right, it wouldn't be biological in nature that we would get on an airplane and fly to another country with a completely different ecosystem, microbiome of foreign microbes that we're not used to. And so it is absolutely true that if we are in a new environment and we're exposed to new forms of bacteria, fungi, microbes, that now when we run a program, when we have a healing phase and we have symptoms, oh boy, it's going to be extra juicy, right? Because we're exposed to this brand new terrain, these juicy microbes that weren't there before.
Mhm, that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah. So now our final fifth biological law we call the quintessence. And this is that nothing is random or meaningless. Everything has a function and it's there to help us overcome the experience we went through. So let me
Hmm.
use the example of Dr. Hummer and his story that was so powerful. So Dr. Hummer went through a conflict of the loss of his child. So now with all of these laws, he was able to ascertain, okay, I went through a sudden, dramatic, unexpected, acute event. I went through a conflict of the tragic loss of my son, and therefore I developed cancer. I understand that, right? And in even the holistic world, they understand that, right? You have Gabor Mate, the body keeps the score, right? Trauma, even generational trauma is coming through and manifesting itself as symptoms in my body. But the holistic world can still say, oh, but the symptom is bad, right? We want to get rid of the symptom because it's not something that's going to be helpful for us. But actually, in our lens, we would say, no, let's look at this like a detective. Okay. Let's be Sherlock Holmes about it and think, if my tissue is adapting in this certain way, what's the function of that organ? And if I look at the biological function of the organ and I examine the way in which the tissue of the organ is adapting, I can see what might be the function of that? How might that help me? So let's dive into Dr. Hammer's symptom, right? He lost his child. If I lost my child, if I lost my offspring, what might be a biological solution? What might be the solution that nature would give me if I lost my child? Have another child, right? Nature would
Mhm.
say, oh my gosh, we've lost our offspring, right? One of the primal functions of nature is the survival of the species. We have to make sure that we continue on as a species. So, what is the function of the testicles? Procreation, right? It's the organ that holds the seed of life. So, what am I looking at when I'm looking at testicular cancer? Oh, I'm looking at a proliferation of cells in my testicles. And what he noticed was like, oh, if I'm looking at the function of the organ, when I'm having this adaptation in the testicles, my testosterone is actually increasing. And when my testosterone increases, I am motivated to procreate again. So what's happening is the psyche, the brain, and the organ registered this traumatic loss. Testicular cancer is a conflict of loss. I've lost my territory, right? For any of you parents listening, your child is your territory. You have to protect and provide for your children and take care of them. So I've registered this conflict of losing my territory. And now when I'm in the conflict activity state, right? Oh my gosh, my psyche, brain, and organ are working in synchronicity to say, how can we resolve this conflict for Dr. Hammer? Oh, I know, procreate again, right? So now I have this adaptation. I have testicular cancer. I have an increase of testosterone. So I will be motivated to procreate once more. By the way, for all you women listening in sacred geometry, like Vitruvian man, yin and yang, the sacred opposite of the testicles is the ovaries. Yeah. So an ovarian cyst is also a loss conflict, has the theme of
Hmm.
loss. And what happens with an ovarian cyst, right? What are the ovaries responsible for? They produce estrogen and progesterone, right? So with an accumulation of cells in my ovaries, I'm going to be a little bit higher in estrogen. I'm going to be more feminine. I'm going to be having a better ability to attract a mate. So I can resolve the conflict of loss that I experience. So many women develop ovarian cysts after the loss of a loved one, a miscarriage, an abortion, the loss of a child, right? And they've actually done studies where they've shown men pictures of women who have ovarian cysts and pictures of women who don't. And the men rate the women with ovarian cysts as more attractive. Isn't that incredible? because
Interesting.
because they're a little bit higher in estrogen because we're still operating on that primal fundamental biological nature, whether we like it or not. We can't deny nature. We try in our world today. We try to deny nature, but we can't. And I even like to use the analogy of birth, right? That we go through a symptom in the body. And even when we know this work well, I'm guilty of it myself. We're like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And I just want it gone. And I just want to get it over with, right? But I love to use the metaphor of birth, right? When we're in the birthing experience, we can't shut it off. We can't say, oh my God, turn it off. I don't want to experience this symptom. Get rid of it. No, we're in it. But
Mhm.
we understand the evolution of it. We understand, well, yeah, I had sex with my lover and we conceived a child and I was in a gestation period for 9 months and now I'm having a baby. We don't go through labor and the birthing experience and go, what's going on? Something is wrong with my body. No, it's a biological experience and we understand the evolution of it. So this paradigm of GNM is actually helping you understand the evolution of it. So when you know GNM and you have a symptom, you don't panic and think, oh, my body is doing something wrong. You look at it like you would birth. You look at it downstream like, oh yeah, this is a perfect natural evolution. I experienced a conflict. I perceived, something like a sneeze even. A sneeze is this conflict of a stink conflict, something that was annoying or frustrating for me. I have a little thing where I sneeze when like someone cuts me off in traffic. It's like, oh, I didn't like that. That annoyed me. That frustrated me that person cut me off. Right. So I look at every symptom from that lens where now I don't go into fear. I understand the evolution of it. Even
Mhm.
our musculature skeletal system works that way, right? I lose cells, I tear cells. I'm in the gym and I'm tearing cells in my musculature system. They're breaking down. And then when I come home from the gym and I rest and recover, all of that tissue gets built back up. So I become stronger than before. But I
But
don't.
you're sore in the meantime.
Yes, and exactly, and that's my next point. It's like, I don't come home from the gym and go, "Oh, I'm so sore. Oh my gosh, my body's breaking down. Something must be wrong with me. I need to
Mhm.
call the doctor," right? I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, I went to the gym and I
Yeah.
adapted
It's
my
like you're saying
body."
when you understand, like, the start, the middle, the end, it makes sense in our
Yes.
brain, but we've
Yeah.
only done that with a few things in our life, not all the things, and so we've
Yes,
been seeing
you're
them as something wrong.
understanding the sequence of it,
Yeah.
the journey of it, the evolution
Mhm.
of it, and you're looking at your biology through that lens. And that is so powerful, right? Because think about it. In nature, you wouldn't be conflict active for a long amount of time. Like if the lion in the wild is coming to eat the gazelle, how much time does the gazelle have? Not a lot of time, right? So in our
Mhm.
primal nature, even if you look at your pets or your animals, they don't stay in long durations of conflict activity. But now, us humans are living in a really complex world. We do stay for long periods of time in conflict activity, and that significantly impacts our health, right? Even, some of the things that we dive into as we get more advanced in this paradigm and we teach, especially in our course, The Biological Woman, is like looking at the female cycle, right? In nature, if we were living in the wild in nature, we as females wouldn't even have that many menstrual cycles because we would be pregnant and then we would be breastfeeding for probably around 2 years. And then we would go and get pregnant again. So even for us females to just have as many menses as we do is not the way it would be if we were living primally. And isn't that so fascinating to think about?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Could you give, a couple examples to mamas listening of working with children, on how to manage, or
Yeah,
I don't even would say manage symptoms or, healing phases, like how
beautiful.
to look at it, how to recognize it, and how to support their children through it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So maybe I can use an example of a symptom and an organ for this one that could be helpful. So one of the big things for babies is the skin, right? You even notice when a baby is
Mhm.
born, you can notice the different textures of their skin, or babies get those rashes all the time, or even the rash around the mouth is such a localized adaptation. Why would that be occurring? So when we look at the skin, the outer skin, we're looking at the epidermis. And this is an organ that is found in the cerebral cortex. So, the cerebral cortex is the area of the brain that is responsible for communication. And doesn't that make sense, right? The skin is how we connect with one another, it's a sensory organ. It's how mama, when baby is born, what does she do? She puts her baby right on her skin. We have this
Mhm.
idea that we talk about skin to skin and how important it is when your newborn baby comes out to have that skin to skin connection, right? When a baby is welcomed into the world, its only territory is mom. The baby knows that it is safe when it's in mommy's arm. So, when we're looking at symptoms that are occurring in the epidermis on the outer skin, we're looking at a conflict theme of separation, right? Because it's this organ of connection. So, it's a conflict of I feel separated from someone, a loved one, a living being, or I wish to separate from a living being. So, think about the mother who maybe drops her child off at daycare for the first time. And this child has never been without mom before. Do you think that could be a sudden, dramatic, acute event, a conflict to, for the first time ever, have to go out and be on my own? Yeah.
Mhm.
And do you think that child could perceive that situation as a conflict of separation? I am separated from my mother.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. So what happens is I drop baby off at daycare and baby starts to perceive a conflict. I am separated from my mom. And now biology works and says, we're perceiving a separation. What can we do to overcome this problem? And psyche, brain, organ work in synchronicity and say, I know, let's diminish sensitivity in the skin so we don't have to feel that mummy's gone. So we don't
Mm.
even notice this because with this organ, the symptom is not occurring during conflict activity. The symptom is occurring during the healing phase. So now the child is perceiving a conflict of separation. They're in their sympathetic nervous system in this state of fight or flight. Yeah. And I'm losing cells. I have diminished sensitivity. And because this is the most advanced area of the brain, the child actually experiences memory loss here. So I don't even remember that mummy is gone. Yeah. And
Mhm.
now when I'm reunited with mummy, if I'm looking at the two-phase program, oh, conflict resolution, I'm back in mummy's arms. And just like nature, what goes up must come down. So if I
Yeah.
lost cells during conflict activity, those now need to be replenished. So what's the symptom that baby has? A rash. Yeah, because I felt separated from mummy. So a common thing that you see a lot with babies is like this rash that happens around the mouth. Well, why would that be? What's that point of contact? It's a localization. Where do I connect with mommy as a baby? On her breast, in my mouth. So when
Mm.
baby's having rashes around the mouth, they're having little conflict tracks of feeling separated from that point of connection that I experience with mommy when I breastfeed from her.
Mm.
And
No,
isn't that
interest
beautiful? It's like, oh, you would notice this. So if your child came home with a rash, you wouldn't say, oh my gosh, something is wrong. I need to do something. You would say, oh, my child felt separated from me. So as a mother, you could go to your child and say, hey, did you feel separated from someone or something? You could look downstream and say, where was there a separation? Did I leave my child with the grandparents for the first time? Did they go away for a sleepover and then come back? And then you could also play detective and say, okay, is this localized? What area is the rash appearing on, right? And maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's that your two children are fighting, yeah, and one sibling wants to separate from the other one. I want to get this person off my skin, yeah. And you
mm.
can even see like we have these little organ adaptations in the skin that happen a lot on the back of the arms, right? These little bumps that come up. So if it's on the back of the arms, I could maybe deduce that I would like to separate, right? Because it's like, oh, I want this person off of me. If it were on the inside of my arms, I would probably want to embrace. So you can even
Mm.
get that accurate of like, where is it appearing? And is this localized, right? What is the point of connection that was experienced there? So when you as a mother are working with your children, you're playing Sherlock Holmes with your child and you're saying, there's a symptom here. What happened just before? And you can help build that relationship with their body. That's what my mom did. She built a relationship. Oftentimes, she knew the conflict because she saw it herself, but she wasn't going to give it away to me. She would say, Natasha, in her German accent, Natasha, do you remember this just happened? And isn't it interesting that now you have this, And it's so funny because, my mom and I, we communicate a lot with each other. We have a very beautiful relationship. Now I might share something I'm going through with her, or in my youth, this used to happen a lot where I would share something I was going through with her. And then a little bit later, when it would come into resolution, I'd say, Mom, guess what symptom I just got? And she would almost know the exact organ adaptation I
Oh,
could have
wow.
run because she would know how I could have perceived that, you
Mhm.
know? So
And so
it's really
you have,
incredible.
like, 2 children experiencing a similar thing, but one have a healing phase and the other not because one experienced it as stressful or traumatic and the other did not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, like, we as a family could go through a collective conflict, but we might
Mhm.
perceive that conflict differently, right? So,
Mm.
let's say we're all in a home together and a fire breaks out. Oh my gosh, one person might perceive that as a scare fright and run an adaptation in the larynx, like laryngitis, like, oh my gosh, right?
Mhm.
Another person might experience that. Oh gosh, let's say something that I haven't used yet. Um,
Well, what if they felt separated from their parent, like, and that was the scariest thing for them
oh
in that
yeah,
moment, you know?
right. They could feel that, or they could feel,
Mhm.
water retention, kidney collecting tubules is an abandonment conflict. This is
Wow.
feeling like a fish out of water. Maybe I'm the last one left in the fire, and I'm there to fend for myself. So when I feel abandoned, isolated, like a fish out of water, Dr. Hammer used to call this also the refugee conflict. Like I've ended up in another country where my
Mhm.
tribe is no longer there. What is the most vital resource my body could hang on to? What is the resource on this earth that we cannot live without?
Yeah, water. Yeah.
Water, water. So we retain water. And this is the adaptation that almost all of us run, right? Because so many of us have these tracks and triggers throughout our life where we feel
Mm.
abandoned, where we feel like the black sheep, where we feel isolated, like the only one, right? And we
But
feel
this is what
this.
makes it a little tricky
Mhm.
because, like you're saying, one experience and a multitude of healing phases can come from it. So it's not like, oh, X equals this every time because it depends on your experience of it.
Yeah, it depends on
Yeah.
the way the psyche perceives the conflict.
Mhm.
But what's
Yeah.
so beautiful about it is your symptoms show you. So your
Mhm.
symptoms tell you the story about
Mm.
how exactly you perceived that situation. And this is why when you also notice that your child is in a conflict, okay, how do I know that I'm in conflict activity? My hands might get cold, my heart rate might change, my breath might start to become more rapid, right? And you can teach your child this. This is the work of a somatic practitioner, right? You can teach your child already how to identify when you've already come into, shifted your nervous system and come into that state of survival mode. And when you notice that your child is in this mode, what can you do to downgrade that conflict? How can you already start to build that awareness and that connection with your child to emotionally regulate with your child, right? A
Mhm.
biological form of emotional regulation would be to pick up your baby and hold baby in your arms, right? And sway
Mhm.
baby and rock baby is a form of emotional regulation. So the more you can teach that as a parent too, the more you can build that connection to say, okay, there was a conflict experienced in our household, or I know that my child went through a conflict. What does my child need to harmonize? How can I return them back into, their parasympathetic nervous system? And then a symptom might come, right? And we're not,
Mhm.
and I don't make my child worried about that either. I get my child out of fear. I let my child know that symptoms are nothing to be afraid of, that they're regular, beautiful, purposeful, meaningful adaptations. And then I might help them connect the dots on that. And even
Mhm.
just already building that awareness, right? Sometimes people come to this work and this wisdom, and just the awareness of a conflict alone can shift their paradigm and terminate a symptom, terminate a program that they've been running. And other
Mhm.
times, oh my goodness, we're only human and we have that theme is not resolved for us. And we get triggered and triggered over and over again. And this is when we have chronic symptoms. So a
Mm.
chronic symptom just means that that conflict theme is still present in my life. And I get re-triggered in that conflict theme over and over again. And therefore the adaptation is running over and over again.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
My gosh, there's so much more to like dive into. I do want to respect our time though. If somebody is really interested in this topic and wants to dive deeper in it, do you have recommendations in terms of books or, do you ever work with families? What are your resources?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So we have in Germanische Heilkunde the scientific chart of German new medicine, and that's a big book that you can see with all the colors. So it's like you can get yourself one of those and have an entire map, although that can feel very overwhelming when you're just getting into it. So another great free resource is learninggnm.com that was created by Carolina Merkala, who happened to teach my mother. And she has
Mm.
put that resource online for free where you can look a symptom up, you can look a disease up. There's another great book called The Psychic Roots of Disease. And then I also encourage you to look at, working with a German new medicine practitioner. So I'm a practitioner that you can work with one on one if you have a symptom that you want to dive into, because the best way to learn is really through your own experience. So
Mm.
sometimes people are new to this work and they might come in and they might do a session and they might work on a symptom. And when we go through it together, they find that a really powerful way to learn, to have somebody who can sit there, hold your hand a little bit, identify that symptom with you and find the story and help you identify the experience that you had that manifested that symptom. And then, something really beautiful because you have so many people interested in female health and the world of birth, is that Dr. Melissa Sell and we work together and we have an amazing course called The Biological Woman. It's an 11-week container where we go through the entire female organ anatomy from top to bottom. And it's pre-recorded modules as well as live calls. And we go through every
Mhm.
topic from menstruation to menopause to conception to birth,
Wow.
right? Uh, this perimenopause, what does that
Mhm.
mean? And it's a beautiful cohort. It attracts an amazing, lovely group of women that we all support each other. And sometimes having a longer container like that really helps. And Dr. Melissa Sell on her YouTube has a lot of free resources. She's got a great module for free online called GNM 101. That is also a
Mm.
great place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all your information and for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I know we couldn't get super into the nitty gritty of the fascinating women's health things, right? I touched on a few, but for all of you listening, if this interested you, if you felt a call in your soul, like, maybe this is a work that really resonates with me, I just encourage you to just start playing detective. Start to through your own lived experience the biological laws for yourself. Don't take my word for it or don't take an expert's word for it because, like we said at the beginning of the podcast, you are the expert of your own body. Nobody knows what it's like to live in your body but you. So,
Mm.
you have all the answers you need. And I just encourage everyone listening to start to build that connection and relationship with their own biology.
Thanks for listening to the Born Wild podcasts. Find us on Instagram or email bornwildpodcasts@gmail.com. If this episode supported you, please share it and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll help more families find us. This podcast is for education and storytelling only and is not medical or individualized health advice. And as always, stay wild.